Welcome to Leadership and Motherhood, the podcast for ambitious, high-achieving women navigating leadership in the boardroom and at home. I'm your host, Leanna McGrath, business leader, mom, and certified executive coach. I believe that every woman deserves to create a life and career on her own terms, one that she truly loves. This podcast is here to help you do just that. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Leadership and Motherhood. I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation that I am sharing with you today. It is absolutely perfect for Women's History Month because I have a mother-daughter duo, and we just had the most amazing conversation. I am talking with Loretta Stagnitto and Annie Ricci. Loretta is an executive leadership coach with a background as a corporate VP in Silicon Valley. She made a career change when her kids were young. And Annie is now in her 30s, and she had been working in corporate marketing and then made a change to a fractional and consulting role a few years back. So they both have really interesting career journeys. And there's so much that we discovered during this conversation about just how much Loretta's career choices impacted and inspired her loved ones around her, both of her kids as well as her husband. And we touched on so many different themes that I know so many of you are going to relate to. A couple of them being first about how our identities and value and worth can get really tied up in corporate leadership. We talked about ambition and how that doesn't go away whenever we have kids. In some ways, it even gets stronger, but how nowadays women are really pursuing their ambition on their own terms and not always in traditional career paths. We talked about self-trust and how hard it can be in the moments of not knowing how everything's going to turn out, and then being able to look back on things and seeing how everything made sense and worked out exactly as it was supposed to, but how hard it is to see that in the moment. And there were so many parallels between leadership and motherhood that just kind of organically came out and just ties in so perfectly with this new podcast because we're talking all about leadership and motherhood and business and home life. This was a really, really special conversation, and I hope that you enjoy it as much as I did. I'm so grateful to Loretta and Annie for trusting me and coming on my show and having this open and honest conversation. Let's dive in. I am so excited to introduce our guest for today. We have a mother-daughter duo here, Loretta and Annie. I think so often we wonder, am I doing this right? Is my child going to grow up and maybe say my mom was never around, or maybe say my mom's my hero? Like, we never know. And so I'm so excited to hear from a mother-daughter duo with an older daughter who has kind of lived through it, is now into adulthood. So Loretta, do you want to start with telling us a little bit about you?
Yeah, I started my career in the what I call Web 1.0 world, which was before a lot of technologies that we use every day were really even invented. Things like voice over the internet and online photo sharing. And so I did that and rose to a VP level. And I would say maybe the last 4 or 5 years of that career journey is when I had children. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure out the balance and, how do you do all that? So I started at VP level and then, finished at the VP level. And I think I just got burnt out. I think that was part of what was happening. We are two busy careers, two little kids at home. My husband would say, Nanny called in sick. I'm like, well, I can't do this, or even laying in bed at night with Annie, like, please go to sleep. I have to work on this. I have to do this. Please go to sleep. Right. So spent a lot of time trying to balance. And then I got eventually burnt out and recognized there was this new career called executive coaching. And I'm like, I feel like I've kind of been doing this all my life. And so all my career. So I ended up transitioning to be an executive coach. And that also gave me a lot of flexibility because I did it on my own as my own business. And I've been an executive coach for the last 20 some odd years and went back into the corporate world. And that kind of kept me in the corporate world, but gave me some flexibility. So that's kind of what I do now. I've been doing this after having a great career as a tech leader, trying to balance it all.
Wonderful. Well, I have a lot of questions for you, Loretta, but I want to hear from Annie. Annie, can you introduce yourself to everyone? Just tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, I am Annie. I'm Loretta's daughter. I am a fractional marketing consultant. So I own my own consulting company, mostly in the consumer product goods space. I've touched everything from like health and wellness to pet to CBD to really baby, all sorts of CPG categories. And my expertise is really in life cycle and customer experience. So I have been on my own in the consulting world for about 3 years now, which is crazy. But prior to that, I was in corporate America for about 10. So it's been an interesting transition to working on my own. And it's funny hearing my mom's story because I can obviously see so many similarities. I'm not a parent yet, but the pattern as she talks about like being in corporate and then wanting something different. So it's just interesting hearing you talk about it, Mom, and matching my path next to yours.
Yeah, listening to you talk, that's what I was just thinking. I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, corporate, then consultant, and oh, yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. So
Yeah. So, Loretta, can you tell us a little bit more about that period of burnout? Like what led to that? I know the nanny canceling, and we can all relate to childcare challenges. That was actually when I decided, like, I'm out, I'm done. It was like when our fifth nanny gave her notice, and I was like, corporate's not going to be for me in this season anymore. I'm gonna do the thing I really want to do instead. But for you, tell us more about like that burnout, like what was causing it, and then did you just like immediately say, this is what I'm going to do instead, or what was that process like for you?
yeah, yeah. When I was sort of starting out, if you wanted to get to the top, you had to do it through traditional. You didn't become consultants. There wasn't a lot of that. So my journey was really trying to hit, up the corporate ladder, which meant, as you know, with a lot of the, your listeners, you're always on. It's full time, and then you go home and you have the full time job as well. So I did in the marketing world. So I did PR and marketing during a time similar to where we are right now with AI, where technology was coming up, and so the web was just starting. So there was a lot of, oh, we need to be part of this, we need to be part of that. So it was constant change, constant change. And then I would say around the year 2000, when the internet first came out, there was not business models associated with it. It was just grow members, get things like that. And then all of a sudden, one day, the leadership says, we need to bring in some revenue here. And so I needed to like figure out, how do I turn this new web technology into a business? And I can't build an e-commerce engine with 3 months. And it just got to be a lot, right? It got to be a lot. I also had two little kids. My husband was an executive, and I was of the belief that you could do it all. I could do it all. But I also remember it was super, super stressful to do it all. And then once you have kids, you have that pull as well. Like you want to go to work, but you want to be home with them. And then you have more and more to do. And so then, like I said, you're trying to get your kid to go to sleep at night because you have things to do to burn the midnight oil, or you have a big meeting the next morning. And it got to be a lot. And then you worry about, is this the right nanny, and all those things. And so I think that when the world finally came, the leaders finally came and said, this is how we need to change. We need this. And I just thought, I just can't do this anymore. But what happened to me then is I sort of lost my identity. It's like, this is what I've been doing all my life. And I think the difference also was I grew up with a stay-at-home mom who worked a lot for my dad. She didn't go to college. And so I wasn't going to be like her. It was at the time when feminism was coming up and all those things. And it's like, I'm going to have this different life, and I can show you that I could be a good mom and I could work as well, and try to sort of balance it all. And then at some point you just hit the wall and just say, I can't do this, because the pull to be with your kids is there and you want to be able to do that. And then you start to see what is it there? Are they being this way because I'm working? And so finally, when I just said, can't do this anymore, need to be able to take a break, I did lose my identity and say, what am I going to do now? And I think that was the pull to coaching, because when I started to see that coming, I thought, maybe I could start to do this on my own terms with the flexibility so that I could do both. But then I think the hardest part there is, you're an executive and then you're trying to move into a different style, which I was thinking about this. I would say it was probably fractional. We didn't call it fractional at the time, but I started to see opportunities where I could go in and maybe do some consulting. And the quest for me was, how do I have more balance so that I could stay working, because that's who my identity was, and yet I could be with my kids. So then I actually left that and I actually trained as an executive coach. And so by training, that gave me a little bit of time in between to be able to, how can I do this training and have this flexibility and still have time with my kids and still keep the nanny? Again, it's a process, but I also remember there were times throughout, raising the kids, feeling like my ambitions weren't being met because it was 10 years into my consulting and I didn't feel like I felt like I was still doing the same things that I had always done. And I wasn't there was no gratification that I was looking for other people because were moving up the ladder and I wasn't moving up the ladder, if you will. So that was frustrating for me. I think I finally found my groove when was able to move into, doing more consulting and building a coaching business. I think it was just a journey. It was just a journey all along the way. When I look back on it now, when I think about those years when I said I love what I'm doing and I love being with the kids, but I'm not satisfied that I'm not reaching where I am. Am I ever going to get there? And then I look back now and say, wow, I did it. I'm very satisfied. I do have all of that. So it was always that struggle of, am I still meeting my goals, and trying to balance out, both of those. So
I wrote down so many things that resonated and that I want to ask you about. But first, I want to hear, Annie, from your perspective, like what came up as you were listening to your mom talk.
It was really interesting when you were talking about your mom and how like your motivation was to be different. And I was thinking about like how your ambition and working like impacted my desire to work and be ambitious. And yeah, I don't know. It was just interesting as you speak, because I think over these last 3 years have been really trying to figure out like what is my career outside of corporate, because I think both of my parents were very much corporate people. And whether it was expressed verbally or not, I think just based on the household I grew up in Silicon Valley and the dot-com boom, and my mom was very involved in Silicon Valley and tech. My dad was very involved in that. And so I think being the firstborn daughter, like subconsciously, I just always was like, that's what you do. That's how people live their lives. And I didn't really imagine a path outside of that path. So for the first 10 years of my career, there were so many things I loved about corporate America, and I got so much of my confidence and like my worth. I think because I had a leg up in the sense that like my parents had been in that environment. My mom's an executive coach, so she understands the dynamics and the culture. So I felt like I really thrived in that environment and almost had more so like an advantage compared to some of my friends who were just starting out or who had moms that didn't work or who, whose parents owned small businesses versus being in corporate America. And then over time, my pendulum has shifted. I don't have kids yet, but it's really important to me that when I do, that I'm really like available and present. And so I think these last 3 years of working on my own has really been in pursuit of having that balance that everyone talks about and figuring out like, how can I have it all or a little bit of each of it in a way that is actually sustainable. So when I do go to have a family, I can still have that like piece of me. But it hasn't been as, I'm still early in my career. In the last 3 years of starting my business, I've just been kind of following my path and trusting like what comes my way and opportunities. And So hearing my mom's path and then comparing my own while she was talking, it's just interesting how many similarities there are that maybe I wasn't conscious of, and how a lot of her desires that maybe she figured out when she was a parent of like wanting to have more balance and all of that. It's kind of nice that I kind of have gotten the opportunity to do it a little bit earlier before I do that. So it's interesting when you think of generational, my grandma, then my mom, now me, and the decisions that have kind of led us here.
Yeah, and kind of the evolution each of you learned from
Yes.
your mothers and then like iterated.
Yeah.
I love that.
Learn what you want and what you don't want, right? Because I knew there was things that my mom that I wanted to be like her, and there were things I didn't want to be like her at all. So she was not the role model in the professional world that I was looking for because she wasn't in that professional world. And so I was looking, my role models. And again, at that time, women were just really making it and I'm like, yeah, that's going to be me. So my role models were all the professional women that made it look like it was really easy to do. So you think about that where, Annie at least had a role model that said, if I want to be in a professional track, I've got a role model for that. So I think that's what we think about our moms. Do we want to be like them? Do we not want to be like them? What do we want to take from them?
As you were talking, I was just thinking about how there's like qualities in grandma too that like are not professional, but that are homemaking and crafts and expressing herself and cooking for her family and being a stay-at-home mom that are like so different that I look at and I admire, which is just totally different than I think like in the last decade, my priority has really been like on my career. And I think in these last few months, as I've kind of been really evaluating my consulting business, it's been like, oh, I kind of want some of those slower things in my life as well, like the simple things of like having the family and cooking and making the home. I think there's also value in that as well. So it's interesting hearing the two sides of the coin and thinking about how I kind of have both of that desire in me.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's a through line of creativity here, right? Like your grandmother was very creative. Loretta, clearly, like you had to have some creativity to think at that time of like, I'm gonna leave corporate and become an executive coach, consultant. Like that wasn't as much of a thing back then, right? Like to your point, fractional wasn't a thing. And Annie, clearly you're in marketing, so you've got to be creative. So there's a creative family here.
Totally. And also just even like my husband is always commenting on when I left corporate and started my business, it was like within like a 4-week period. I was like, okay, I stopped my job. I got a consultant client. I'm going to incorporate. This is what I'm going to do. And it just happened really fast for me and felt very natural. And my husband's like, that decision or even starting the like business aspect would have taken me like 6 months of like really thinking and ideating and trying to decide. And I think my mom's being so empowered and emboldened to say like, I'm totally capable of doing this on my own, obviously had amazing support at home and a very successful career prior to starting her business. But I do think that's what gave me confidence in being able to kind of take that leap of faith, because I was able to watch her do that and believe in herself.
I love that. One thing that you both talked about, and I think would be really interesting to hear more about, is the idea of value and identity. Loretta, you talked about that there was kind of questioning your identity after you had left corporate. I experienced this as well. I took a 2-year career pause where I was full-time parenting. I was working on like renewing my coaching certification and things like that, but that was really my primary thing. And I would always introduce myself by saying like, well, I used to work in corporate. I used to be a corporate VP, because to me that was so important to like who I was and how other people viewed me. And Annie, you also talked about kind of how in the corporate world, like you got so much value and worth from that. So I'd love to hear from both of you on that piece.
It was hard. It was hard because I was so career oriented and so ambitious. And so when I stopped, I'm like, I don't know who I am now. This is who I am. This is what I do. And now I have to be a stay-at-home mom, for a little while. And that was something I didn't want to do because that was what my mother was. And I didn't want to be like that because at the time, women were trying to find their place. And I think the other difference was I had achieved such a high level. And then when you start all over again with your business, right, it's different. So you used to say, I used to be, and I would be like, well, I was a VP of marketing, but marketing and coaching are not the same. And so people were like, well, what's coaching? What do you do? Where they know what marketing is. So I really felt I vividly remember driving home from a training course and literally just sobbing, just like, I was there and now I'm at the beginning all over again and I want so much and I can't. And that pull, it was hard, but you figure it out, you figure it out along the way. And I think because my children gave me such joy and because I knew that that was also really bad and that I wanted to be a role model for my daughter, right? Because you have all these things that when she grows up, I want her to be this and I want her to be that and I want her to be just. So I think that was hard. I remember that was a struggle going along the way. And then at some point, it's just like, okay, I'm good at this again. And so now I can be identified as this. And I also think the world was changing a little bit. Women weren't working so hard to be up there. They were sort of there. So I could say, yes, I have been at that level just like others. And so that I think made it a little bit easier once I sort of felt settled in my second career, if you will.
It's a hard one for me. I think I'm still working through it. I didn't do school wasn't really like for me in elementary school and high school and stuff. I struggled. I started working really young and I was really good at it. And like I always got a ton of feedback, like positive feedback at work. I loved being there. I loved being like the person who could handle everything. And I loved being the youngest at I just took a lot of pride in that. And then going into corporate and feeling like I understood how the politics worked and how to play the game. So it gave me a lot of confidence and worth for a long time. And it still does. And I think part of my task, I was really emotionally invested in the last company I worked full time for. I was the first hire. It was a startup. I was there for 4.5 years. Like we built something from the ground up. It was in Sephora. Like it was literally like every, 25-year-old's dream at the time. And it ended up getting sold. And it was a big loss for me and was really devastating. So that's kind of what led me to being in a consulting capacity is it just kind of not only naturally guided me that way, but also was kind of a test to myself to become less emotionally invested because it was so devastating to me, the loss of that. I felt like it was like that company was like a part of me. So for the last couple years, I would have like touted that I'm in a much better place from an emotional investment standpoint. And it's so nice to be kind of like in a fractional capacity where you're adding a lot of value, but you're one shoe out the door in terms of like worth and identity. And what I'll say is like when you're with clients for a long time and you care deeply, like you end up becoming emotionally invested. And I'm constantly trying to work on, okay, if that campaign doesn't perform to expectations, that doesn't mean that I'm a failure. It just means that, we could have done some things differently or there's learnings there. So it's a constant work in progress to separate the identity, like the highs and lows from work into my self-worth and identity.
Yeah. So, Loretta, the whole time you were talking, I was like, man, I can relate to so many of these things. And Annie, I feel like we have a lot of things, similarities too.
Yeah.
Well, I too joined a tech startup when I was 25 and was there for 10 years. And it was such a huge part of my identity. And then when we sold the company, it was devastating. I mean, it was our choice and it was positive financially, but it also meant that our team dispersed, some on their own and some, not by choice. And it was really, really hard to have built something from the ground up and then to just kind of like watch it disintegrate. And there's real grief there and loss. And so it's like then what you did is something that is similar to what I did because I was like, I just need to change my relationship with work. I need to figure out how to be less emotionally invested. And what I eventually realized is that like, it's not that the emotional investment was the problem. It's just the loss that I need to like truly like acknowledge and process because it's a really, really big loss whenever you go through that. And I feel like we could have a podcast just on that or an emotional support group because it is like your baby, you're a startup.
You put something, it's vulnerable and creative, and you put something out in the world and like you watch it grow. And then to step back. I mean, I'm sure there's so many parallels to being a
Mm-hmm.
mother, but you kind of have to set it free and just be okay with how it changes and evolves without you.
I love that.
Yeah, the identity piece is definitely something that I'm constantly, yeah, if you have any tips for how to emotionally disconnect or update your relationship with work, I'm all ears.
Oh, I realized that wasn't the answer. That wasn't necessarily what was going to change. I was always going to have the same relationship with work. I just needed to like accept that when you love something that much, that loss is a part of it.
Part of the experience.
I'm sure Loretta can relate to as you've seen your kids off. It's like when you become a mother, that is part of the deal. You have to like let go a little bit more and more all the time.
Yes. 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 That's what I would keep thinking when I think about the loss as well. And I think maybe because, the loss of I was at this level, I had done all of this, and now I'm sort of starting all over again, trying to rebuild something all over again. And it was in a different domain, it was different. And so that was grief, that was hard. And yet, there was always the excitement of, well, and now I'm building something else. And so now I'm a business owner instead. So you try to figure out how to adapt your identity to what you're doing at the time and being separated. It's not like, well, if this doesn't succeed. For me, I think what was fun was I was using all my skills, but then I was trying to build a business on my own. And so that was something that was different for me. I hadn't been building the business. And so that was new and that was different. And so I could relate to something like that instead. I think that's what helped me maybe get through the loss or the identity piece, because it's like, well, if I can turn this into something else, even though it's the same skill set that I'm using, but now I'm doing it in a different way.
You had something to like put your attention on that felt new and you were learning and growing.
Exactly.
Challenging in a different way.
Yeah. Annie, we also are both firstborn daughters. Loretta, are you also a firstborn daughter?
The middle child.
She's the middle child. She has an older brother. And she is the most quintessential middle child in the dynamic, which is just so funny.
Yes.
Tell me more. How so?
She's definitely like the peacemaker of the family. She's the one that like is, I feel like you are always like coordinating with your mom and then relaying to your siblings. Like she definitely wears a lot of hats in the dynamic.
Yeah. And I think being a girl, my brother was born first. And because of that, they put a lot of attention towards the boy, the boy, the boy, the boy did everything, the boy did everything. I think my parents had different expectations. I can vividly remember my father was like, you have to go to college. You have to go to college. You have no choice to go to college. Great. That's not whether you're going to go or not. It's which college you're going to go to. And then maybe 5 or 10 years into it, I remember he'd said to me, what are you going to do when you have to give this all up and just raise kids? And I'm like, wait, you were the one who told me I had to go to college. You wanted me to do this. And now you're saying you want me to stay home. Yeah, I think that was, I don't know what that had to do with being the firstborn daughter, but I had not only the firstborn daughter, but it's a different path because there was so much put on the son. And then the daughter had different expectations. And I was trying to fight my own to try to be more like the son. And they were happy about that. But then at some point they're like, no, now you have to be the traditional mom again. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Annie, you had talked about being the firstborn daughter. For me, I don't know if you feel this too, but like I feel the weight of making my parents proud. And for me, I've got an entrepreneur dad and an amazing full-time stay-at-home mom who like poured everything into us. And so I always felt like I've got to be an amazing entrepreneur and I've got to be an amazing mom, right? Like I've got really high standards for both. And you talked about like you kind of felt this unspoken expectation of being in corporate.
Yeah, I definitely felt, and I don't know if it was anything that like, my parents were doing intentionally. I think it was like the example that was set for me and the like subliminal, I mean, as like a firstborn daughter, it's like a subliminal like feeling of expectation that maybe isn't actually like verbalized or felt, but it's just there. I definitely felt like, my brother has a more atypical career. He's a influencer. He like, took a completely different path, a more entrepreneurial path out the gates. And I think I've always kind of felt like a subliminal pressure to, follow the same path that my parents had, not because it was the only one, but just the one that was modeled for me. And they both were so good at it that it just felt like, okay, well, that's like the natural thing for natural next step. So yeah, I'm definitely like, as I am on my own and like considering, starting a family at some point, like you start to think about those dynamics and like, what do I actually want? And is that the path that I want? So it's definitely been a lot of introspection over the last, 5 or so years.
Yeah, well, I think you are describing what happens for so many women that I work with and that I've talked to, where it's kind of like the path we start out on is the one that's kind of expected of us. And then we decide what we expect of ourselves, right? And what path we want.
Totally. It's interesting, just to give my mom some shout out here. I was having kind of a tough work situation recently and like seeking advice. And I've always been I mentioned my grandma was very creative and she's an actual artist. And so I've always been very creative. And one of my ways of seeking balance since starting consulting is taking pottery classes, like wheel throwing. And I've been doing that pretty consistently for like a year and a half now, a couple hours a week. And that's just like built into my schedule of like, you have this time, use it in a way that's like an outlet and creative. And so I was having kind of a talk with my mom where I was like, corporate is too stressful for me. Like, I don't want to do this. And just having one of those days where it all felt like too much. And she was like, why don't you become an artist? And that was such like a shook moment for me because I was like, I didn't even know that was like on the table, and obviously I'm a 32-year-old grown woman and I can do whatever I want. And, my husband is supportive of, my career path and how I want to slice and dice it as we go forward. But even just hearing my mom say that, I was like, oh, I literally didn't even know that that was like a possible option in their mind. And I think that's part of the firstborn daughter of like, just making a lot of assumptions about what's expected of you.
Yeah, I can absolutely relate to that. And I love that gift that you gave Annie, Loretta. that the gifts that we can give without even realizing we're giving a gift. But
Yeah.
because, yeah, I do think we internalize a lot. I don't think that, at least for me, I don't think anyone ever explicitly told me, you have to be successful. You have to carry on the family name. But like, I somehow created those expectations within myself or internalized those expectations based on whatever messages I was getting or whatever was being modeled for me. One of the things I love about both leadership and motherhood is that there's so much overlap and there's so much that we can learn from our careers and from being in leadership roles that we can apply to motherhood. And there's so much we can learn from motherhood that we can apply to being great leaders. And what you said there, Annie, you were talking about like that you went to your mom for advice. I was just thinking like, oh my gosh, how exciting that probably is for anyone that maybe we're not thinking about right now whenever we're trying to get our kids to bed so that we can get back online and and finish our work. And and we're going through it. We're going through like these really challenging experiences with having young kids and juggling being a corporate executive. But in 20 years, like we're going to be able to give advice to our kids about, about like their careers because like we've been there and that's so cool. Like how exciting that is.
And it's the best, like the best advice.
Yes.
When I think about it, especially as a mom, you see the talents of your kids, right? And so you see the talents of them and you're like, oh, they'd be amazing this and they're going to be amazing that. And I mean, I'm just blown away. Both of us, my husband and I, are in the tech industry and neither of our kids showed up in the tech industry. And as we were growing up, we're like, well, we're in Silicon Valley. This is what they're going to do and all that. And Annie always had an artistic bent to her. She was an amazing, I have pictures in my office of things she drew at 12 years old. And so she's always done that, right? But it was like, can you make something with this? No, I never anticipated when she was young that she would grow up to be an artist because that wasn't on the corporate and all. But I think as you watch them and you start to see their talents and you start to see the things they do, and it also is the generation, right?
Yeah. The world changed in a lot of ways too. Yeah.
And now women can be successful artists and be recognized for all of that. So I think you get to the point where you go, wow, they're very talented. They've done those things that you expected of them because you knew their talents. And now they're at this point going, I know she can do anything she wants to do. She'll make it. And so kind of sit back a little bit. And then you also say, but you are a great artist and you would be really good at this. So maybe you should be thinking about this.
Yeah.
And I also identified probably one of the reasons why I decided to become a coach is I couldn't deal with the corporate stress either. I just said, this is not who I am, but being an executive coach allowed me to play in that world, but not play in that world.
That's right.
Like I could go home and I could talk to people about it and hang up the phone and go, oh, thank God it's you. And I'm not going through that because that, is frustrating.
Yeah.
So I think it just has a lot to do of seeing people's talents.
I think too, probably when I was younger, I mean, as I mentioned, like I wasn't great in school. So you guys probably were in a way trying to guide me towards the most successful path, which was the one that you guys had known, right? Which was like the corporate ladder and all of that. And so I think like maybe even in more subliminal ways, there was like nudges of like, this is how you would be able to provide this life for yourself and all of that. But as we said, it was never like explicit. And I think that's like, as you kind of get older and you're like kind of unpacking where that voice in your head comes from, like what is the origin of those thoughts? Like that's, I think, where you start to kind of piece it together a little bit.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think is really interesting that you brought up in your story, Loretta, is about how when you were working in corporate in tech, the internet was like coming to be, and the parallels of that time with now with AI coming and changing everything. And so whenever I was thinking about like how you could go to your mom for advice, Annie, like how cool is it that you had that experience that now we're seeing again? And so I'm curious, Loretta, is there anything that you have learned from that experience that maybe for anyone who's like, oh my God, how am I going to deal with all this change? This big thing is coming in and just disrupting everything. Curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I think about that. We thought about that in the tech world, right? And oh, how is this disrupting everything? And things are changing so fast. And when I look at it now, I remember things like when Facebook came out or when a lot of those platforms started to come out. I remember thinking, well, there's going to be a lot of industries around this to support this. And so even now, when we talk about, AI is going to take over and take over a lot of our jobs, or my husband's, and Annie knows this, he's always talking about the robots. The robots are our future, and the robots are the ones that are going to take, and they're going to take over everything. And I'm thinking, well, then there's going to need to be a whole industry around taking care of robots and, that sort of thing. So I think it has allowed me to say it was crazy at the time, and it felt like, you didn't know where it was going to go, and there was so much change. And now I'm so many years past it and seeing it again and going, we'll get there. This is just something repeating itself. We'll figure it out and you'll develop your careers around it. When I was in college, I remember used to say, the jobs that I'm going to be having in the future haven't even been invented yet because it was internet. So, and I still think that's the same thing. Annie's kids are probably going to be in a world that we don't even know what their jobs are going to be because who knows what the world's going to be. And so it's scary, but we've gotten through it and it's turned out to be okay. So I think that's what I think about is you just recognize that. Think about the parallels and where were you before in all this change and how did you come out the other end and what's the same and what's different. And so that's where I think we are in the future. I think that's what we're experiencing now. It will settle down. We will figure this out and there will be great opportunities, but we don't even know what those are yet.
Yeah, I love that perspective because it is easy to get overwhelmed by all of the change. And I think that it is always helpful and grounding to hear from people who have lived through a similar change and had that experience, just to hear your perspective.
I mean, think about like, you probably couldn't even conceptualize the idea that we would all have like a little device in our pocket with like a camera that we could go online and talk to. Like it was like, 40 years ago, like that wasn't even. So I appreciate that perspective, hearing that, because it does feel like the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's like cycles. So interesting.
That's right. One thing I'd like to hear a little bit more about from you, Annie, is I love how you have talked about that you are really right now working on creating balance intentionally before you have kids. And I'm curious, I guess I'd love to hear a little bit more about like your experience with a mom who created that balance for herself whenever you were a kid, right? Who decided to leave corporate. And I'm not sure, maybe it'd be helpful to understand like how old you were at that time, or if either of you remember.
Mom, I don't even remember. I think it was after Jake.
Yeah, you were about 5 or 6 when I started my own business. And I remember vividly because I had my own business. And one day we went to Visona and you went roller skating, and it was in the middle of the day. And I'm like, this just feels so weird to me because everybody's working and I'm not, and I'm playing hooky. But then on the other side, I'm like, but I'm spending time with my daughter, and I'm so lucky that I get to do this because I have this, That's kind of what I keep thinking about is it was hard because I kept thinking, I'm playing hooky, but I'm doing this on purpose so that I could have that time with her, so that I could try to figure out how I could have that time with her. How can I do it both?
It's interesting because as I reflect on like my perception of my mom's job as a child, I don't think I took it as seriously because she was at home. And so I look back at how I would behave. Like, I think it's like if my mom was on a meeting, like I had no shame just like walking in there and like asking her to put the phone down.
I don't think any child does.
No shame. Yeah, like I fully would go in and be like, I need this right now. Or like if she didn't answer my calls, I would call 10 times, And I think because she was home and my dad was always going out to work and had the more like vanity career in a way, I don't think that I understood how hard my mom was working and how much she was juggling until I started working myself. And then especially when I started working from home. Because I think as a kid, you don't really like, I didn't really understand. Like she was just always in her office on the computer, right? And like we didn't have remote work back then. So it just, I don't think I viewed it. But I think as I got older, I always knew my mom was a working mom, and it was different because my friends' moms didn't work as much. And I had a lot of friends, parents who were divorced, and both my parents' sides, there's divorce, like on their siblings. So what I did take away early in my mind is like, you always have to have your own income. You want to have financial independence. Like that was like very much a big part of my family and identity and household. But I don't know that I was like fully conscious of what my mom was actually doing or really like respected it until I got older and started working in corporate, just because I don't think I understood it because she was home. So it was just a different time back then. But yeah, then I remember starting my business and being like calling her for like, okay, how do I write like a scope of work? Like, what do I charge? Like, how do I invoice? And that's when I really started to be like, oh, she's been running like a major business and operation that I really didn't give her credit for a long time because it was just, she was always home.
Yeah.
A funny story I remember, Annie, and you've probably heard me tell this story a lot, Annie. She was about 3 years old, and I came into the room, and her back was towards me, and I kept saying, Annie, Annie, Annie. And finally she turned to me and she goes, be quiet, I'm working.
Oh no. Life imitates art.
And I remember picking her up at a friend's house one day, and her friend Kelsey, and she opens the door and she goes, what do you do? And I said, well, I do marketing. Do you understand that? She goes, I don't know. Annie says you're just always on the computer working.
Well, I remember like we had this like artist photo of my mom in it. She had like two computers and like two phones or whatever. I remember because my mom didn't stop working in the corporate world until I was like 6. I remember that you always working a lot back then and being busy and all of that. I think it was when you started your business that it was, I don't know that I was perceiving it in the same way at that age.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that my 7-year-old fully understands what I do either.
Totally. Well, and it was interesting. I actually felt like it was like, to your point, Mom, about how I was, don't bother me, I'm working. When I was at my previous company and we did start to have to work remote, it was very disorienting in the beginning, having kids home and stuff. And my former CEO at my previous company was like probably 6 or 7 years older than me, total like just badass CEO, mom of 3. And she did, in our one-on-one say, can I ask you a personal question? Like, do you remember going up to your mom when she was working and being like ever feeling rejected? And I was like, so taken aback by the question because this was like, she was my, a badass boss, but we didn't really like go there in terms of emotions and parenthood and all of that. But she was like, I'm starting to recognize that being home, my kids like think I'm available. And so they come constantly into my room to get my attention. And I feel like all day long, I'm just rejecting them. I'm just saying like, get out, I'm doing this. I have one more meeting. I'll come see you after. So that was an interesting moment for me, even in my own personal introspection, because I think it was just such a different, like I said, I didn't really understand what my mom was doing, and I was a child, so I didn't really like have respect for that boundary on her side either. So it's interesting when you think about it.
Yeah, that was certainly one of the challenges of the pandemic, because we also, usually you didn't have childcare. It was like these kids are just running around and you're hoping for the best. I remember my husband and I like sitting down every night and looking at our next day, because our daughter was 1 at the time, and we couldn't just like leave her unattended. And, it was like, okay, what is your meeting schedule? What is mine? And then we would just kind of like each split the day and then be up until all hours of the night trying to finish the day. And so, yeah, it was really challenging. And then I think even now, a lot of women are, still working from home, which it's great. I love the remote work aspect, but then school seems to always have vacation days or they're closed, especially in the winter time on the East Coast out here. You might not be experiencing this, but we have a lot of snow days. We have a lot of 2-hour delays where you're like, oh man, like that, I've got to get her to school at the exact same time that I've got this client in this call. And it's so amazing to be able to work from home and be here. And also it does bring a different set of challenges with it.
Totally. One of the teams that I work with is predominantly working moms. And they all are based on the East Coast. And so when the snow day happened, like the conversation in our Slack channel was like, wow, I could have been way more respectful to some of my coworkers in COVID, because I didn't have kids then and I didn't know how hard it was, and the pressure that I would put on them for like deadlines or getting things done. Like that was just a big point of conversation in our Slack channel, because it was really like the first time that everyone had their kids home and realized how hard it was to actually get anything done when they don't have childcare. So it was definitely a learning this year with all of the snowstorms and winter freeze.
Absolutely. For you, Loretta, of trying to balance, it sounds like Annie believed that you were always available. So did you intentionally prioritize if the kids needed something? How did you handle that?
For many years, in between before I became a coach, after I quit my job, I did marketing consulting. And so the value that I found in that was flexibility. I could manage my own time, so I could schedule around different things. We always had nannies though. So even though I had my own business and I was working in the house, I always had a nanny. And the house that was at the time was set up, was the room that they were always in was right next door to my office. And I was always in this fishbowl, and I could watch what was happening outside while they were, watching TV or what they were doing. And I was in this fishbowl and I was still working. For me, it took a while. That thing that I kept saying about, I feel like I'm playing hooky, it was hard for me, because I always felt like, wow, the world's working and I'm not. Or it's middle of the day and I'm out doing this when normally I should be at work, but it's okay because you are working and you're bringing in income and so those conversations in my head, but I knew I specifically did that so I could spend time with my kids.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I think it was intentional, and it was hard to balance it, but it was a choice that I made because this gave me the best of both worlds, if you will. It was a challenge, and to say, this is my time with them. I think even I remember when my son was born and we had the nanny, and it was hard because the nanny came and I wanted to be with both of them.
Mm-hmm.
But the nanny wanted to take Annie away so that you could spend it, but I wanted to be with her. And I don't know, I wish I knew then what I know now. I probably would have done it a lot.
I think you could say that about just about everything. Right?
Hindsight.
Yeah.
What I found most interesting about what you're saying is the hooky aspect of it, because I still feel that. And I also feel like that's part of the reason why I do get so emotionally invested in clients, is because there is this unconscious, like we should always be on during the day. And so there is a lot of like consciously undoing that or trying to, that you can go out for a walk at 1 p.m. and not need to be, taking calls. Like that is definitely a learning for me still. So it's interesting to hear you talk about it.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to that's like someone else's voice, right?
Exactly.
Someone like that shaped one's career. And then you get to a point where you're like, what do I want the rules to be actually?
Totally. I think in my life right now, I'm just for some context, I had like 9 friends have babies last year. Like my whole friend group, everyone in my life, basically, we were joking, don't drink the water because it's spreading. For me, as I was kind of recently talking to my mom about, when I had I want to be an artist conversation, and talking about my own career, I did like have a moment where I looked at like all of my friends some of them went back to work, some are amazing stay-at-home moms, and they're operating on a wavelength that like I'm just so not even in because I'm so wrapped up in the corporate world that when I think about it, I'm like, oh, there's a whole world going on outside there. There's so many facets to our identity, so much more than just that 9 to 5 hustle. So it's been a nice reminder to look at the people in my life who are balancing it and doing it in a different way and aren't needing to be the CMO, but maybe, the director and are happy with that and are able to have, both aspects of their life versus just career being the primary aspect. So it has been something that's been really nice to observe and also remember that so much of it is that voice in our head. And when you kind of step outside of that and look around, you're like, all I think about is how amazing of a mom my friends are. And if they have a career, I'm like so proud of them for balancing it all. But there's no part of me that's like looking at theirs the same way that I'm looking at mine. And I think so much of that is that like internal voice that's, this is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah, because their internal voice is probably telling them they're doing it all wrong.
Totally.
That's one of the biggest challenges of motherhood is like we think we're not doing it right or, everyone else is doing it better than us. And it's just not true. I feel like just about all of us have believed that at some point.
Yeah.
What I think about is kind of where you and I started, Leanna, was when we, talked about it. Today, women have so many different choices. In my early career, it was like you go up the ladder if you want to be successful. If you're ambitious, that's the way you go. Where over the years, and what research is showing now is that women are more ambitious, but they're doing it under their own terms. So they are choosing to be fractional. They are choosing to take a couple years off and get back into the world. And people don't say, well, you haven't been working for 2 years, and maybe you're not the best candidate for this. So there's just much more opportunities now to be able to say, I can be ambitious, I can be a leader, and I can be a mom, and I don't have to do it all 80 hours a week. I can do this 20 hours a week and this 40 hours a week and still feel I'm fulfilling my ambitions. I'm doing what I can do. And I would never at 32 years old think I could go back and do my own thing and start my own job and then feel like I'm being successful, where Annie's in a world where she can do all of that now because people look at it saying, wow, look at how successful her business is. Look at how successful she's been after all these years. And it maybe would have happened when she was 40 or 50 with all that experience, right? But to be able to do it now. So I think it's just lovely that women now have these choices because you can't. I remember we used to say you can do it all, but not all at the same time. And now I'd say, well, you can do it all and maybe all at the same time as well, because we have those different choices and it's not up to someone else to make us. The only way you're going to be successful is if you follow this career path.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's been prescribed by somebody else.
Yeah.
In a work environment that was set up by men with stay-at-home wives.
Yeah.
Taking care of their kids on sick days. And
Yeah. I was just thinking about this post that I saw, but it was saying like the path that was carved out for us was like ultimately designed for a man. And like, I think I said this to you, Mom, when I was talking about my balance and burnout. And I'm like, my way of being successful, like if I need to follow and act like a man in the workplace, like that's not, I have a cycle and my emotions are different. And some weeks, I'm feeling more tired and run down. And like, I want the flexibility to adapt my work at a way that works for me and that matches me and meets me in the season that I'm in versus having to like completely mask myself and lean into this super hard masculine energy to be successful, but like burn myself out because it was never meant for me.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's kind of the concept of like we're climbing someone else's ladder
Yeah.
that we didn't even put there, like we didn't create. And so there's one thought of kind of like, well, we can create our own ladders. But honestly, I don't know if women had created the workplace. I don't know that there would be a ladder.
Yeah.
I don't know. It might look a little bit different. And so
Yeah.
for me, I used to find a lot of fulfillment in trying to climb that ladder because, every rung was like so exciting. And now I think it's more like, yeah, whatever I'm building, I wouldn't call it a ladder, but it's something that is working for me where I continue to feel successful and excited along the way. And then I feel, to your point, Annie, like in different seasons and different cycles, like I don't feel as good about it. And then I'm feeling great about it and excelling. And to your point, Loretta, about ambition, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like we get to define our own ambition. It's not that we're less ambitious. It's just that this way that we have been measuring ambition of climbing up a linear ladder is maybe just not the way that resonates for so many of us.
100%. Because then you climb it and you're like, well, what did I do that for? Now I'm burnt out and I'm tired and it doesn't feel the same way it was supposed to feel.
Yeah. Or you get to the top and you realize, like, I'm in the wrong place.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. How did I get here?
Yeah, this isn't where I was trying to get.
And now what? It's like
Yeah.
it wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
Absolutely. So I would love to hear if there's anything else that either of you feel like we haven't touched on that you want to share.
No, and I hear this with the clients, the women that I work with as well. The struggle still goes on, and it still goes on in trying to fight all of that balance, or as Annie said, bringing your masculine energy in the corporate world and yet, doing it differently. So the struggle is still there, but a lot of my clients have even taken the break and said, I'm going to take a year off and then think, oh my gosh, if I do this, am I never going to get back? Or it might take me a while to do it, but they land. It's just really interesting how they land, and it may take a while to get them to land. And then they talk and they tell others. I think about the coaching groups that I have with executive women, and they come back and say, I was really scared. I was laying on the beach feeling guilty, but I'm glad I did it. I spent the summer with my kids. And now look, I have this amazing position and I'm in a much better space because I took that time. So my encouragement is if you want to take that break, if you want to do that pause, you can get back on it. There is that opportunity. So don't be so worried or so scared about it that, oh, I'll be different because I've had that couple of years off. I think we have choices these days, and you can do that and still be successful, or of your own terms. Yeah.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, when I left corporate, everyone was like, oh, it's such a big risk, or like, you're going just to stay at home with your daughter. And I said, like, well, first of all, corporate's always going to be there. I can always go back. I never had any fear that I couldn't go back. Like my skill set is needed. And if I want to go back, then that's an option for me. But like my daughter only has this one childhood. I can't go back to it later if I decide, this isn't what I want to do anymore. So I don't want to miss out on that. Like that seems like the bigger risk to me. And that was why I did take a career pause. So I know everybody looks at that differently, but that was how I was looking at it. And that was what gave me the confidence to take that leap without a parachute, because it is scary, certainly, to think about like, well, I don't know what the future holds, especially when we've been on a very linear path where future is well defined for us, right? Of like, do this, get here, do this, get here. And when that's gone, it can be very disoriented.
It's almost like the trust and confidence in yourself too, which I think is so hard to see when you're in the thick of it or the middle of it. But then looking at even your circumstances, Leanna, and how you're now on a path where like you probably feel so much more aligned. This is your business. You are getting to talk to people and spread your wisdom. And so I think it's so hard to see it in the moment, but the trust that like wherever this is leading you is ultimately your path still, whether it looks the same before or after.
Absolutely.
Those are the key messages that I would say, give yourself permission. Just if you feel like, you're worried about it, you won't get back, you'll lose something. A lot of people don't have that mindset that you had. They didn't say corporate will always be. There's like, no, if I leave, I'll never get back. And I think we need to encourage them to take your own path. You will get there, whether it's starting your own business or going back. You will, but give yourself that permission to take that time because yes, your kids, they only have a certain amount of time and you want to be there for them. And you can do that and still manage your own ambitions. So give yourself that permission instead of worrying about the risk. And like you said, then the risk is, your kid grows up and says, well, mom was never there for me. And then all the guilt you have when you're older in life, because saying, if I knew then what I know now, I would have done that a lot differently. So if you have that opportunity now, do it now. We're in that world. You can do that now.
Yeah. There's no situation without risk.
Exactly.
I know you have one more question, but I was just laughing as I was joining this. I saw a reel that was like, just a quick question from someone who's not a parent in corporate America. Like, after the 3-month maternity leave, like, where does the baby go? Like, where do you guys do with it after the 3 months? Which is just kind of so funny because I'm like, in this remote world, like, people do have kids and then they just get back to it. And like, you really don't get to see or have visibility into that aspect of it. So I think it's so important that we have these conversations about a different path forward. And it's been very inspiring.
Yeah. Well, my last question is for you, Loretta. And this is actually kind of what we were just talking about here as well. You said in the beginning that you felt like there was this 10-year period where like your ambitions weren't being fully met. And then looking back, and that's that hindsight that we've talked about today, you're able to say like, I did it. And so I'm curious, as you look at Annie, at your kids and kind of like where they are now and this whole journey of motherhood to where you are now, what do you see when you look back at what you've created for yourself and what you've created for your family?
The interesting thing is all four of us, my daughter, my son, my husband, we're all entrepreneurs. And I would have never had thought that they would turn out to be entrepreneurs and starting their own. I thought I was the only one creating my own path. And then, after my husband retired from his job, he's busier now. He used to say, I just want your life. I want that flexibility. I want your life. And, now my daughter's an entrepreneur and my son's an entrepreneur. That I had never expected that because I just made the assumption that they were going to follow in that path and do the same things. So I guess I just think when I was thinking about it at the time, I would say, I don't know if I would ever get there for me, but I knew my kids were brilliant enough that they would end up doing what they needed to do. But now I sit back and think, wow, how did they get there? How did they become so successful? How did they do that? And a lot of it is because, and similar to when you were interviewing your own mom, right? We were role models. We watched them and then they took their path. And so that's what I think about. It's like, I don't know how I got here and what I did along the way and what made me feel differently. But when you see the end result and you see who they are and what they're doing, you're like, wow, we must have done something right along the way. So I think it's just that trust, that you do the best you can and you take care of yourself, but you take care of them and they will find their path with your support. But I couldn't see that where I was at the time. And now I look back and go, of course, of course. Why did I doubt this? Of course, this is how they turned out because of what they saw, because of who they are. So,
yeah. Well, what I love about that so much is that you modeled that self-trust, and all three of the people in your household were inspired by that to go out and trust themselves to create what they wanted to create. I love that. That's so amazing. What's coming up for you, Annie?
Dad got so much street credit growing up because he was like very much like, I mean, he worked at a big company. He was an executive. So he got a lot of street cred in our household. But then when you look back and you're like, oh, mom, like we all kind of ended up following your path. And like, we didn't really give you that credit growing up. And it is fun to see it full circle and also like have you be cognizant of the value that you provided to us unknowingly as we were growing up.
I love that.
That was interesting. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So lovely. And we're not going to hear that from our 7-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. Flash wait 23 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, this has been such a joy to get to spend this time together with both of you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. And Loretta, in our early conversations, my crazy idea where I was like, let's bring your daughter. Let's have a conversation with all of us. I'm so appreciative to you for being open to that. And Annie, for you to being open to talking to someone who your mom, I don't know how those conversations went of, hey, I've got this person for us to talk to on our podcast. So I'm just so grateful to both of you for coming on and sharing your stories and sharing so much of yourselves today, because I think I'm so excited for everyone to hear from you and just hear this, because like I said at the beginning, we don't know whenever we have young kids. And like you were saying, Loretta, like you just don't know. You're just doing it. It's on a leap of faith, where you're like, you're just going, you're just like making the best decisions that you can, but we don't necessarily have any evidence of success until much later. And so I just love seeing the two of you and your interactions and your relationship and how much you've gotten out of your mom's example, Annie. And it's just amazing. So thank you both.
Thank you so much for having us. This was so fun for us.
Thank you for the opportunity. This has been really fun. I think we could just keep going.
Yeah, for sure.
Agreed.
There's probably a lot of people that are going to be listening going, yeah, yes. Oh, that's right. What she said. Right. And so I think it's great to be able to share our stories and to say, have faith. You will get there. You can take care of yourself and you can have what you want for your children as well. But you do have to be intentional about it. You do.
That's right. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. And thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in today. And we will see you all next week. Thank you so much for listening to Leadership and Motherhood. I genuinely hope you're walking away with something helpful that will positively impact your life. If this podcast resonates with you, it would mean the world to me if you'd support the show by leaving a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, sharing an episode you loved with someone you care about, and/or by following the show. I hope you'll join me again next week. And until then, I'm wishing you all the best in this season of your one and only precious life.